Hi everyone, this is Katherine Turnbull from Turnbull's Threads. I'm here trying this knitting podcast thing again. I think I'm going to change the format from the last video because obviously it didn't go so well. And kind of divide my videos now into kind of two parts. One more of like the knitting podcast idea with a little bit more traditional knitting podcast, what I've been watching recently, talking kind of about what I've managed to finish, my works in progress. I'll talk about some of the things that I've gotten if it's specific for like a different project. And I guess kind of my thoughts. This will be a little bit more rambly, I guess, maybe a little bit. And then save other crafts for other videos in the channel. Because, yeah, I'm still doing other things. I'm doing lots of other things, but I think I want to maybe separate it, and maybe that will work out better. And maybe in the future I'll do some videos focus more a little bit like on specific projects. Like if I'm working on a specific project and it's kind of cool or interesting, I might do something a little bit more focused, I guess. That's what you would call it on that one. So today I'm gonna go through and talk a little bit about what I have been knitting on in June and July. So the last one of these I did was in May, and then at the end of July, I ended up having a bunch of visitors. So I wasn't doing any filming while I had visitors down here, because I actually wanted to be with my visitors, because that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then I had a roommate move in. So beginning of June I had visitors, end of July I had visitors. Yeah, I've had bunches of visitors in the last 2 months, which is kind of weird since I live in southeastern Louisiana and it is hot here. Like, it's warm pretty much all year round. There's no need, like, it doesn't snow here. Maybe once every 5 years. Once in a decade, it'll snow. But snow, not an issue here. Which I enjoy. I will admit, I do enjoy that aspect of it. But it also means that July and August are horrible. Because this is swamp country. And swamp country means there is water. And water means there is humidity in the middle of summer. So, even if it says that it is only 97 degrees outside, what that really means is it feels like it's 104 because your humidity is like 80, 90%. You go outside and you hit a wall of water. It's horrible. So, if you want to visit this area of the country, you don't come in the summer. The summer is probably the worst time to come visit because it is hot, humid, it feels awful. Yeah, don't. My advice to all of the people who are watching this, if you ever watch this, don't visit Louisiana in the middle of the summer. Unless you have to, avoid it. On the other hand, it's great in the fall and the spring. Even in the winter, it's pretty good. Like, you might have to wear a light jacket. But, like, a light jacket. That's all you're gonna need in the winter. So, for all of those people up north who have to deal with snow, doesn't happen down here. It's wonderful. But, unusually, I had visitors in the middle of the summer. So, yeah, June and July did not happen in terms of doing any type of podcast kind of thing because, yeah, I had visitors, so that was what I focused on. But I was still knitting during those months, which was kind of interesting. So I have been fairly productive, surprisingly enough. During these 2 months, I've gotten a number of things finished, so I have a number of finished objects to show you all. Yay. And I've been actually going through and using some fibers that I haven't worked with a ton previously, so I guess in terms of my knitting journey, I learned to knit fairly young. My great-grandmother taught me how to knit when I was like 5 or 6. Right? No. Might have been a little bit older. I was fairly young. I don't remember it very well. But she taught me to knit, and so I ended up knitting a really horrible, scarf for my doll. And then have continued to do it kind of off and on since then, but hadn't really ventured beyond rectangles, and not even like rectangles in garments. It was mostly like scarves, lots and lots of scarves. So I've done a lot of scarves in my past, and mostly knit and purled until probably about 5 years ago, and then I was like, I can venture out. I can do something besides a rectangle. So I made a hat. Ooh, I know. Big change. So we graduated to hats, and then really over the last probably 2 to 3 years, I've actually started being a little bit more adventurous in what I've been doing. So starting to do more advanced things besides knit and purl. So dipping my foot into things like a little bit of color work, lace work, etc. So a lot of what I've been using in terms of yarn before this has been acrylic yarn because it's cheap, and when you're young, cheap is good. Nobody else in my family really knits, so they don't really know what to get me, and in terms of like yarn, they're like, it's yarn, it's what I found in the craft store, I'll give her that. So I didn't have a ton of fun, exciting things to get besides really acrylic yarn until recently. So that all being said, I have worked fairly extensively with a bunch of different acrylic yarns, but now I've been having the opportunity to kind of work with some other things. And so I've been playing around a little bit more with like cotton, realizing that it is hot here, very, very hot, and I am not going to be knitting with wool in 100-degree weather. That's just not happening. That sounds like torture. So I'm not going to be knitting with wool or like acrylics in the middle of the summer around here. That will wait until it cools down a little bit. So in the meantime, I've been working a little bit more with like some silk and cottons, which actually have been fine. Like, they don't trap heat. Whenever, if I'm knitting a garment or something, once it gets long enough, it's slightly uncomfortable, but it's not, I'm dying, get this thing off me kind of horrible. So yes, we've been messing around with some cotton yarns and some silk, which behaves a little bit differently than your typical acrylic does. So that's been fun. So without further ado, I suppose I should actually talk about the things that I just finished. So the thing that I'd been working on for the longest time, which reminds me, yes, I have a knitting journal that I just started, kind of, which is telling me what things I have knit and when I finish them, which has been really helpful. I like it. because I don't always remember. The thing that I've been working on the longest is actually this thing. So this is my mantilla stole. It's a pattern by Monet Drager, and I've been using the Darn Good yarn lace silk and emerald or enchanted forest. So this is a lace project, first like real lace project, and it ended up being a little bit bigger than I think the pattern necessarily called for. It used a lot more yarn than the pattern called for, so I might have had a gauge issue a little bit, but it's a stole. It's not necessarily something that has to fit me exactly right, so I was okay with it, and it blocked out beautifully. So I'm gonna pull it up. You can see the lace in it. So I really, really, really loved how this one turned out. It is gorgeous. So the way it's kind of constructed is you have a center lace panel, which I think you can see. So it starts like here, and then you knit that basically in a long rectangle down, and then you add a lacy border to your rectangle by picking up stitches along all of the edge, and then knitting about, let's see, how wide is it? It is that wide. So that thing right there, all of this, that's your border. And then you knit the border around it and then join it in basically a Kitchener stitch once you finish your border. So it was a bunch of lace. But once you obviously finish knitting it, because it's lace, it's not blocked. And blocking makes such a difference. So I don't know if you can see here. Let me see if I can pull it up. There you go. So you see all those nice little points there at the bottom? Yeah. Didn't have those when I got it off the needles. Like right off the needles, didn't look like that. And so I obviously soaked it in water. So I did soak this one. It wasn't a steam block. This was a soak it in water, put it on my mat, pin it down, and then wait until it dries, which, because it's lace, it did actually dry really quickly. I think it took maybe a day, which, considering it's Louisiana and it's the middle of the summer and it is very humid, things don't necessarily dry very fast here if you were to put them out. So the fact that it dried within a day, it dries fast. And then you could actually see all of those details because your blocking has actually stretched it out, and it makes it's gorgeous. I love this one, and I really like the colorway too. The blues and greens are just my kind of colors, and then obviously you can put it on, and I do not need it now, so I'm going to take it off again. But I really enjoyed it. Would I knit it again? I mean, maybe. It's kind of one of those pieces where it's not something that, it's a stunning piece, and I love the piece, and I highly recommend the piece. But I wouldn't necessarily want to knit it again, just because, I don't necessarily want a ton of them. A ton of this particular one in a bunch of different colors. It's not really a utilization piece. It's an accent. It's an accessory. So, I don't know. I feel like accessories, unless it's something that you absolutely love and cannot live without having more than one of them, and if you manage to lose one of them, it will be the end of the world. I don't think that you need to knit multiple of them, so I'm probably not going to knit this in any other colors. I love this color. I love this particular stole. It's beautiful. Once it cools down, I will probably be using it a ton in the fall, because it's really lightweight. So on those like cooler summer evenings where it's not hot enough to need anything really heavy, but like you've got a breeze, you kind of want a little something just to help like keep you a little bit warm, this is going to be perfect. And because it is beautiful and it's a blue and green color, it will go with a ton of my stuff. So I will definitely be getting a bunch of use out of it later. Not now. I will say it is a lace pattern, so I know I made some mistakes in it, and you can't really see the mistakes until you block it. And even when you block it, you may or may not notice it. I know I made mistakes because there were a couple of times where I was like, I have more stitches than I'm supposed to have. We'll just drop a stitch because I don't know where my mistake is, and I'm not going to try and find my holes that it was before, because this particular lace pattern wasn't necessarily knit the lace and then you then like just do a knit row and then another lace. There were a number of rows in the pattern where it was lace on lace, and so trying to unravel that was not something that was happening in my future. So yeah, I didn't change anything with this pattern. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. Maybe some other people will eventually make some of these. But yes, that was the thing that I'd been working on the longest. I cast that on in February and I finished that in June. So that was my first finished object and I'm really happy with it. So continuing on, the next thing that I finished. So the next thing that I finished is actually a garment, and it is this. So this is called the Haddonfield, and I know I've showed some tanks in some of my previous videos, so this is where I've been getting those tanks and tees from. So Knitted Tanks and Tunics by Angela Hahn. As you can see, I have more that I'm going to be knitting from this. So seeing as I live in Louisiana, like I said, your traditional sweaters are not something that I'm going to be making a ton of use of here. I do have relatives in places that I visit where it is cold and I will use them there. But even in the middle of winter, a lovely wool jumper is not necessarily something that I absolutely need. So I had been looking for a book that would have a bunch of like tanks and tees, things that I can wear here. And knit here too. So with that in mind, I looked through this pattern book and I tried to find as many patterns as I could where I already had yarn from my stash that I have a very large stash. So finding yarn from the stash that would fit with the patterns that were in this book. And doing that, we came with this. So the Haddonfield is one of the patterns in there, and it's a lovely tee that has some really nice like lace details on the sides. You do some short row shaping for the arms, and then you pick up along the neck and the sides to actually kind of finish it off and finish the whole look. So I actually had cotton in my yarn stash that I use for this. So this is, I love this cotton yarn in the colorway Black Sparkle. And I did enjoy this knit. There's like a really good balance of just plain stockinette stitch, because like the front panels and your two side panels and your back panel are all stockinette stitch, and then it kind of gets interrupted every so often with your lace pattern. And once you get in the hang of it, the lace pattern is fairly repetitive, and it's really easy to kind of get into a cycle with it, right? So you do your stockinette, and then you know where you are in your lace, and it's fairly easy to get through because you're kind of mirroring your lace on each side. So I did enjoy this. I really like the way the tea looks. I will say that I don't think I gauged, well, I haven't gauged swatched really for any of these, so part of it is my fault. I will admit that. Part of it, this is my fault because I did not gauge swatch. But the thing that I've noticed with this particular book is that when I use their needle size and their yarn, I probably need to go down a size in terms of when I'm knitting. So this one, according to the measurements in the pattern, that should have fit me. This one is big. This is, it's noticeably big when I put it on. So kind of one of the ways that I'm working around that, because it is knit, I have added kind of this belt thingy. Yeah, you can see it. So I've added a belt essentially to it to kind of emphasize the waist, so it's not quite so blocky, because if it had been like an actual sweater, right? So if we're talking a nice knitted jumper, like how big this is would actually work out really well. It's kind of big. You would be oversized, but this is a tunic, so once you kind of lose the arms, it just looks really baggy on you. I found that, like, at least with the tanks and tunics, for me personally, I want them to be a little bit more fitted, just because you don't have that balance, right? You end up with your arms and then the body area that has to be covered, and if it's too boxy, it just doesn't look right. So it's too big. So I'm obviously working on fixing that with having the belt kind of cinch the waist in so that it gives you a little bit more of a flattering image. But I do think that I want to do this again at some point. When I do it again, I'm going to be knitting a size smaller. And I did make some modifications to the actual tank as I was knitting it. So another thing that I've noticed with this book is that it likes to leave the armholes a lot longer than I would personally like my armholes. I don't. So generally they're like down here or lower. Like, I don't particularly want to have my armholes down that low. I much prefer them to be a little bit more fitted around my arm. So pretty much everything that I have been knitting from this book, I have been modifying. I've been modifying the armholes so that they're a lot smaller because I don't want my armholes that big. So I did shorten the arm straps in the back. I did probably, like, I think it calls for 10 rows that you're doing in the back. I did like 3. So yeah, I have been shortening all of the sleeves, or the straps. Arm straps? Sleeves? I don't know what you call them. Arm straps? If someone knows what that particular, like, this thing that you have on tanks and tunics, whatever that is, if someone knows the name of it, please comment it below, because I obviously am drawing a blank. Anyways, I have been shortening all of those with this particular thing, this book, because they're just too long for me. I don't know. I don't like them that long. But that does mean that I do have to make modifications in terms of like the number of stitches that I picked up for both the armholes and the neckline, because obviously they were smaller because I shortened the sleeves. Armholes, arm straps, whatever the things are called, I shortened them. They're shorter, so you take up less. And I will say that I really enjoyed the feel of this yarn. I love this cotton yarn is actually really nice and soft cotton to work with. I really enjoyed working with this one. I will say that the sparkle, it does have like a strand of sparkly plasticky thing that's incorporated with the yarn to kind of give it that shine. It behaves like it does with any other type of yarn. It'll unravel at the very ends because it's not really incorporated into the yarn. It's just wrapped kind of barber pole around your strand of cotton yarn. And I've had issues in the past where that can get really pokey. If it's not either a decent quality or if it's a little too stiff. That can be really pokey and make working with any type of yarn that has that wrapped around it really uncomfortable long-term wise. But this yarn, it was really thin and it was actually fairly soft. And so even as I worked with it, like I never had an issue where my fingers started to hurt or ended up with any type of problems as I was working with this. So I do enjoy that particular cotton. I will probably use it again. I don't know that I have much else to say about this particular top. I haven't worn it yet because I just finished putting the belt on after figuring out that it was excessively big. So I did start this one in May, and it took me 2 months, pretty much exactly 2 months to knit it. So started it the 15th of May and ended it the 15th of July. So I'm pretty happy with it. Yeah, and I did, because it is cotton is lovely and that it is usually dryer and washer safe, and because it was so big, I did go through and threw it in the washing machine on warm and threw it in the dryer, and it didn't shrink it enough. Hence the belt. So yeah. This is machine washable and dryable. That makes me so happy. Because most of the time you can't necessarily, you can't do that with any of your wool knits. And a lot of knits it just doesn't work with. So that is one thing that I have really, really been enjoying about these cotton knits, is that I can throw it in the machine and just wash it. I will say though, some of that, I do have one cotton one that I have knit that I think I showed last video, or the video before. So it's a blue piece with 2 wings that kind of cross in the back. It's a teeny tiny bit too small because I shortened the wings a little bit too much. I should have made them just a fraction longer to make it a really decent shirt. But that one I don't necessarily dry. So I will throw it in the machine to wash it, but I do tend to block it because I did put it through the dryer once and it didn't, the shape that it's in kind of does need that blocking effect. So if you do have something that is cotton, you may still want to line dry it or block it in order to get the right shape. But it is really nice that I can throw it in the washing machine in the dryer and it will be done, and I don't have to wait and leave things lying around my apartment as I work on them. Yeah. So that's my second finished object. I have 2 more to add to this. So the next thing that I knit was the Atlanta from the book that I showed previously again. So this one was such a fast knit. So here it is in all its glory. This took me about a week to finish. It's like really easy, like it is plain knit up till so it's work from the bottom up, and you do basically plain knit all the way up to where you divide for the top, and then you switch into a garter, then you knit the entire thing up top too. But because you're working in back and forth on the straight instead of in the circular, you end up with a lovely garter detail up top. But they do a little bit of waist shaping, if you can see. So I hadn't ever done this type of waist shaping before, so by changing like needle sizes, so going from a large to a small and then like changing it multiple times, right? You can actually make your fabric smaller. Like it does a little thing because you used bigger needles. So I really like the fact that it did that. Like it was fun and easy to do. I will say one of the things that I wasn't too happy about with this one, and this is just a me thing, not a problem with the pattern, is the cast on. So my cast on method that I used didn't really create a really nice edge to it. So if I were to do it again, I would make a prettier cast on edge because it is like very visible, and so I would prefer it to be prettier. There's that. Other things about this, I once again shortened my straps, so I actually did the recommended for the front strap, and then I severely shortened the back strap. So the back strap was actually supposed to be the same length as my front strap. So my front strap's that big. My back strap is that big. Yeah, I noticed that it was getting too long, and this actually puts that armhole right where I want it to be. If you like longer armholes, then yeah, you would want to follow her instructions a little bit closer, but I don't, so I didn't. And that actually worked out really well with that. I enjoyed it. So for this one, the yarn that I used was really cheap. So I live in the States, I live near a Walmart. I had bought several cones of their peaches and cream yarn. And so when I was looking through the book, I was like, hey, I have a ton of this peaches and cream yarn hanging around my house. So why not use some of it on this? I know it's not the best quality, but I mean, I can make a tank for $10 or less. $10, yeah. So I chose one of the colors that I was interested in to make this, and I will say about that one, it does hurt my fingertips. Like using it for a long period of time, I will notice that like my fingertips will start hurting as I'm working with that yarn. So it wasn't exactly the greatest hand feel as I was knitting through my tank, but it was a very quick knit, and it was a fairly cheap knit, and I actually like it now that it's been washed and dried. It actually has softened the cotton up a lot, so I like the feel of it a lot more now. It is a cheap cotton though, so it does have a pretty prominent twist, and so you can probably see that it does this. it's not a very straight yarn. So yeah, I have it. It takes a little jog along the side. So there's that. But because of this one and kind of how it went, I wanted to actually try to design my own tank real fast. So that is my most recent completed object. So I started that at the beginning, or July 20th, and then I finished it. When did I finish it? About a week and a half later. So I did my own design. Used the same type of yarn because since this was my first time kind of making my own design, I didn't want to necessarily sink my really nice yarn into it if I wasn't going to be happy with it. So I figured might as well, I have a ton of this. We'll try it out, we'll see how it goes. If I enjoy it, we'll think about making more things, original patterns, but with maybe some slightly nicer yarn. So I chose one of them that had the nicest hand feel for me. Basically, I went through and felt them all and was like, okay, that one's hard, that one's nice, I like that one, we'll use it. So I have my own knitted tunic. Yay! Ha ha ha. So I also knit this one from the bottom to the top. That's how most of the tunics have been done here. So you start in the round and you go up to the top and you divide it for the top. So I had some fun details with this one. So I went through and I did a picot edge at the bottom. Let's see. Quit focusing on me. Focus on the edge, camera. Maybe. I don't know if it's focusing. I don't think it is. But there we go. Found it. So there's a really nice picot edge. So I did this using yarn overs and knit two togethers after knitting a little bit at the bottom. And then once I had done that, I didn't actually sew it in. I did this fun thing where I knit, like once I hit the row where I was folding it over to actually get the yarn overs and knit two togethers to create that little scallop thing, the picot edge at the bottom. I basically ended up, you pick up your cast-ons as you're knitting and you knit that with that stitch that you're working on. So you end up incorporating it already into that hem at the bottom, so it actually is, it makes my finishing so much easier because all I have to do, like, I don't have to sew in anything at the very end on this. I don't have to sew around the bottom, like it is done by the time I have moved on from it. So I knew that my other one, because it's not the best yarn, had some pretty severe tilts with all of my columns. I mean, they are columns. Like, my rows were not centered as it got knit in the round. They slanted. So I decided that I would maybe try to counteract that a little bit with doing sections of basically a knitting through the back loop. So, fun note about my knitting, I do knit through the back loop regularly because of the way that I purl. In order to counteract the twist on my purl, I have to knit through the back loop in order for it to like look right. If I knit through the front loop, it ends up creating a bunch of space, so I'll end up with like two rows that are close together, a space, two rows close together, a space, two rows that are close together. And the fabric just doesn't turn out very even. So in order to counteract that, I actually have to knit through the back loop regularly. So that means whenever it's like knit through the back loop, I kind of have to reverse that and be like, oh, I need to knit through the front loop. So what I did was I alternate, like I would do sections where I knit like I did normally, and then I would do a row where I knit through the front loop and then go back to my normal, knit through the front loop for another row, and then go back to normal and continue on. And it does help with that slant, right? This isn't nearly as slanted as the other one is, and it actually creates some really lovely subtle rows that you can see in the fabric, which I adore. I didn't expect it to look like that, and then it did it, and I was like, oh, that's gorgeous. I love that. I am really happy with how that turned out. So you get kind of a subtle row effect where like you see little chunks that get separated. And so I did that up to my top where I wanted my armholes to start. And then I had a dilemma. So I wanted to have like this top part here be a different pattern, kind of like in the Atlanta. I want it to be textured on top and fairly plain on the bottom. But I wanted there to be kind of a clear separation between the two. So I was like, okay, I'd seen some patterns where they'd managed to kind of create a line, and was looking at how they did it, and they're like, oh yeah, we like totally bound off and then we pick stitches up again, and it's like, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound like fun. That sounds horrible. So we're not doing that. We're going to figure out something else. So because they did that, though, that kind of gave me the idea of how to do what I ended up doing. So if you see at the top, come on, focus on it. It will eventually focus, I think. That's good enough. So you can see right here, right? There's a really nice line, and it actually continues all the way around the back, right? So I kind of did a modified bind off thing. So what I ended up doing was actually knitting through the front and the back loop, and then taking one of those and bringing it over 3. So if you knit through so you cast off for the armhole. So I first cast off for the armhole, bound off for the armhole, then you start the next stitch, right? So once you start keeping your stitches on, you can't continue to bind off. That kind of defeats the purpose of not doing this. So what I ended up doing was that first stitch that I was going to keep, I knit through the back and the front loop. And then you pull it over, and since you're not pulling that yarn over that, you end up keeping it over, and then you knit through the front and the back of the next loop. And by taking the farthest, like that first front and back, and bringing it over the first 3, you end up creating that really nice detail where it's like a straight horizontal line. So yeah, I was really happy with that. And then came the issue of what texture I was going to use at the top for the top detail. I ended up doing a seat stitch kind of, because I originally had wanted to do a trellis like what I'm doing with one of my current works in progress, but the numbers weren't really adding up correctly for it, and I didn't want to think through it that hard. So I was like, what'll give me something similar-ish to that? So I ended up going with the seed pattern, and then doing some shaping details in the back, did some short rows for the armholes, and then kind of the front is pretty plain and simple. In my original vision for this tunic, when I was first creating it, I thought that I was going to be adding a picot edge to the sleeve holes, to the armholes, but that was kind of dependent on the pattern that I had thought of, like the stitch pattern that I had originally planned on going with. And since that didn't work out, I don't think it would work with this particular one, like to have that stockinette appearance that you have to do for your picot edge to do that. I do want to eventually try and do like a picot edge on a tunic, but not this one. And likewise, I thought about adding something to my neckline. I may still eventually add like a crochet border to it just to kind of firm it up a little bit, but it actually lays really flat on me, and I am pretty happy with how it looks right now. So I don't think that I'm going to make any changes to it currently. I do need to actually write down what I did so that I can actually replicate something like this if I want to, again. But in terms of like coming up with an idea and knitting your own pattern kind of on a wing and a prayer, I am really happy with it. I really enjoy doing that, and since it's just been finished, I haven't really had a chance to wear it yet, and it's having a worsted weight cotton shirt is probably gonna work a little bit better a little bit later in the week, because it's been hot. Like I said before, it's been real hot. It's actually been in like the hundreds, and having something that thick might not be ideal for the next couple of days while it's supposed to be 100 plus. But I really enjoyed it, and if there's someone out there who is thinking about like coming up with their own pattern or like mishmashing pattern ideas together, do it. Like, try it. You can end up with something that you fall in love with, because like, I love knitting other people's patterns. It's really nice to have someone else's instructions and know what you're getting into and how you're doing it. But coming up with something yourself, you kind of are able to modify and change things how you want it to be. Like, I use some of the same techniques that I practiced in that first tee, like the Atlanta tee that I had showed you just before, but I changed them because I didn't necessarily like how it worked out in the Atlanta tee. Like, I liked it, but it wasn't necessarily knit for me. And by creating my own pattern and everything myself, like, that is mine, and it's kind of to my body shape. And because it's mine, it's also something that I'm really proud of, and I really enjoy doing it. Yeah, so my advice to anyone who wants to do it, go ahead and do it. It's fun. It's something I will probably do again. Okay. This is going to be a long video. So that brings me to my whips, my works in progress. So I have one that I am still... This book. Haha. I have another one, another thing that I'm working on from it. So this is my current works in progress on it. So this is supposed to be, what is it? The Yuma, I believe is what it is. Yeah. It's the Yuma. So this is going to be another, I don't know, is it a tank if it only has one shoulder? Or is it a tunic? I'm not sure. It is going to be a thing that goes on the top. That has one arm, it kind of creates a slant. So I wanted to try this one out because the pattern looked kind of neat. And I really liked how the slant went. I thought that was kind of a neat effect, and I wanted to see if I could do it. So I am using a darn good yarn for this. So the cotton in the colorway Blaze. And I'm actually currently holding two together. So the pattern calls for, I believe, a 2 to a 3 on the yarn, and the yarn that I'm using, it kind of fluctuates between a 1 to a 3. So I decided that I would hold two together, kind of go through some of it and see how it turns out, see if it does what it should be doing for this pattern. Because I worried that if I didn't hold it double, that it would be a little bit too see-through. Like, it's a lacy pattern to begin with. And I'm worried that it's going to be too lacy. But we'll see. So I do need to work on this some more and see about getting a little further through it. Because it is a pretty colorway. I do like the colors. I think it'll be fun. But I'm worried that I'm going to have to rip back. I'm worried that I'm going to have to rip it back and knit it singly. So that I may have a bunch of frogging in my future. And I'm not looking forward to it. So we're gonna knit a little bit more on it, see how it turns out. I also don't know if I'll have enough yarn if I double up. So I think that I have enough of the colorway and that particular yarn to go through and do the whole pattern with what yarn I have, but with it doubled up. I think I have enough. We may be playing yarn chicken in the future. But if I don't, and if I'm not really seeing the pattern coming through because I've held it double, I might have to separate it and hold it single and knit it again. Yeah. Knitting journeys, doing things like this. This is fun. So, yes, that one is one that will be talked about probably in the future. So that brings me to my final project that I have started. So this one is a little bit more of a longer project. So I cast this on end of June. So it's not been too long, but it has been a little bit. So this is the Trellis Shell. I don't know where my pattern is. Trellis Shell by someone. It was published in the Interweave magazine a couple of years ago, and it's part of my decades project. So I have sewing patterns and knitting patterns from pretty much all of the decades to the 1900s. And I'm kind of trying to work my way into the past. So I did a 2020s pattern already, and that's finished. I did a 2010s pattern, and that was the one that I just finished, the Mintia shawl. So this is a 2000s project pattern that I am working on and have been working on for a little while. So this is a shell pattern. It's actually a pieced garment instead of a knit in the round, which I have done a couple of pieced patterns before, but nothing necessarily like this. my piece patterns in the past, I did an infant one, and then I did kind of 2 blocks, so slightly different. So this is the start of it. So this is the front, and it's creating a really nice trellis pattern. I really like how that looks. But like, I think I'm gonna be doing a couple of modifications on it. So I have almost finished knitting how long the pattern calls for the front part. So you knit the front, and then you end the trellis pattern, you start a rib pattern to go to the bottom. And I have looked at the picture that they came with the pattern, and it feels like her trellis pattern goes further down than this is going down on me. And like taking the measurements and everything, I feel like it's not going to hit me at a nice spot, right? So where it is right now, it's going to be like right underneath my breasts. So that's not a natural waist point on me. It needs to go down a couple more inches to actually hit my waist, and like with the picture, what they did was they put a belt around the shell in order to kind of cinch it in. So it ends up being kind of 2 rectangles, essentially, back to back, that you end up sewing together. But like by using that belt to kind of cinch it in, it gives it a little bit more of a flattering shape. And then they put, like, the point at which they put the belt was the natural waist of the person who's modeling this particular thing. And at their natural waist, their garment that they have on has just transitioned from the shell into the rib pattern. And if I stop the pattern where they're having me stop the pattern on this, I think it's not going to hit that point on me. So if I were to put a belt on it, it would look weird, because you would have like probably 2 to 3 inches of rib pattern up above the belt that the belt would not cover. So I'm thinking that I will be modifying the pattern, which is lovely. Yeah. But I will say that I have been actually enjoying this one. The yarn is the Darn Good Twist Sport Weight, so it called for sport weight yarn. This is my second time maybe working with a sport weight yarn. It does take a while. It does take a while to knit things this way. But it is creating a really nice fabric. I really enjoy the fabric. I love the trellis pattern. It's gorgeous. And surprisingly enough, I actually like how it's turning out. So the yarn versus the actual fabric, I didn't think it would look exactly like it does, but because of the way that they made this yarn, where they kind of have a solid color going through, and then the other ply that they have twisted around it changes colors mostly, because you have that solid color, like it allows that color play to really give it depth, right? It's not overpowering it or anything. It's just giving it a little bit more depth and interest in your fabric. And so I'm ending up with a really nice like color, like the color pooling that you get from that play, that second ply, is not overwhelming it, right? So it's kind of, that solid color is muted the other one down so that it looks really good. I actually am enjoying how the fabric has turned out. I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out. It was one of those, like, I found the pattern, I liked the pattern, I wanted to use yarn in my stash instead of buying new yarn for it. So I found yarn and was like, this is the one that I have enough quantity of it to actually fit this pattern. And yeah, I'm actually pleasantly surprised with it. I really like how it's turning out so far. So we'll probably do a couple of modifications to the pattern because that is kind of where it's been going since I've started knitting garments for myself. I will say I hadn't knit myself anything before this year, like garments. So I've knit a poncho for myself and a bunch of scarves and a couple of hats, but not really any sweaters or tees or anything like that. So yeah, I am happy with how this turning out. We'll see how it goes. That was my final works in progress that I have worked on this year. I have a variety of other ones hanging around my apartment, but we're not going to talk about them because I didn't work on them so far. Which I guess brings us to the last part of a traditional podcast. I did actually buy myself some yarn for a project these last 2 months because it was my birthday. So my birthday treat to myself was to actually go ahead and get a pattern and a sweater, like that sweater's quantity of yarn for my gift to myself for my birthday. So we'll kind of go through. So the pattern, I found it on Ravelry. It's called the EZV by Caitlin Hunter. And I kind of wanted, so my goals for this year have been mostly to kind of like expand my knitting experience, expand the things that I do try. So I've obviously started that with actually knitting garments for myself since I hadn't done that before. Knitting lace, so I knit a whole item in lace, I showed you that. Designing my own knitting pattern. So colorwork is something that I haven't really played with before, so I wanted to get a pattern where I would be doing some colorwork. So I did get me some very fun yarn. So I live close enough to New Orleans that I actually went to the yarn shop down in New Orleans called the Quarter Stitch because it's in the French Quarter. And I ended up getting my yarn there. It's a really nice shop, I will say that. It has a ton of different types of yarn there. It's expensive yarn, so I probably won't be going a super ton because I can't afford to go all the time. But I did get all of my sweater colors worth of yarn. So, this is gonna be loud. So it's not exactly the identical to what they say in the pattern, but it is the kind of right weight and it should be the right quantity. So hopefully I got enough yarn. So you can see in there they have kind of a clay color and then a couple of contrast colors. So you end up with 3 contrast colors and a main color. So for my particular pattern, I decided to go with this as my main color. So like a gray neutral. So this is called the Niebla by Melbrigo in their Rios. It's got 4 of those, so I figured that was a pretty nice solid color and I would enjoy wearing it and working with this particular yarn. So now that I had my main yarn, I needed a couple of contrast colors. So I kind of wanted to do not necessarily a gradient, but like colors that would contrast and kind of go with each other. So I love blues and bluey colors. So my first one that I found was this one, which I love the colors for this one. So it's a blue-green kind of colorway. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, okay, that's perfect. Now I need to find stuff that goes with it. So having found this was the only color that they had in like this particular type. So this is Mountain Colors hand painted yarn, and they only had the Harmony Brook colorway in this type of yarn. So I had to hunt around and find some other colors that I thought would go with it. So as I was hunting around, I ended up finding some Madeline Tosh hand-dyed yarn in their other yarns. So, right, this was the first color that I found. So those were the colors that I decided to add to it. So obviously love the greens, and my favorite color is red, although I don't tend to wear a ton of it. So I found this and was like, ooh, favorite color that I also love. So what will bring them kind of together? What kind of goes in the middle? And so that's where that purple color comes in. So the purple color, like, you can see that it has kind of some hints of some of those reds, and it also has the blues in there. So yeah, found those and was like, oh, that's perfect. So now I have a sweater's worth of quantity of yarn for me to knit a sweater for myself, a birthday sweater for myself, but not in July. I bought the stuff in July, but it is not getting work done until it cools down significantly around here. So yep, that's my yarn purchase and all of my completed works and my works in progress for the months of June and July. I don't really have anything else to talk about, I guess, right now. And the sun is going down, so the lighting is kind of getting worse for this video. And I've been talking for a while. So I guess stay tuned. I will eventually be putting out another yarn podcast in the future. I'm probably also going to try and do another video that is not going to be yarn related. It's going to be all my other crafts. So if you're only watching this because you like to look at yarn and all things knitting related, don't watch the next video. The next video is most likely going to be a little bit more my calligraphy and some of the other crafts and projects that I've been working on in the meantime. If you enjoyed this, feel free to like and subscribe if you want to be told when the next thing that I potentially put out will be out. If you have any suggestions or things that you want to know a little bit more about, please let me know in the comments. I think that I'm going to try to include a little bit more this time in my like notes on the video, kind of at least give you the actual title for the book that I've been using and the yarns that I've been using, and any patterns that I have. That way, if you're interested in them, you can find them. I am on Instagram if you like to look at pictures. You can find me there either under, well, you can find me, the links I'll put in the bottom in the description. That'll work. Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I did recently create a Ravelry account. I don't really know how to use it. I've been going through and like liking and favoriting things, but I haven't even attempted to try and add my yarn to it yet. That's kind of overwhelming at this point because I have so much yarn here in my house that, like, going through now after the fact and adding it all to it, like, I would, in order to be motivated enough to add all of my yarn to my Ravelry account, I think I would have to actually, like, do a video where I purposely get it all out and then add it to the account. And, like, I have some of it already kind of designated for a variety of different projects. So yeah, but you can't find me on Ravelry. I do need to go through there and probably add some of the pictures and some of the patterns that I've done to it. That'll be fun. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great evening. Have a great rest of August. Stay safe. Stay cool. Unless you're in the southern hemisphere, and then you might want to stay a little bit warm. And I hope you enjoyed this. We will talk again later.